Greetings, brothers and sisters. I'm Professor Spira, and welcome to yet another discussion here and Mucus-free Life LLC. And wanted to talk a little bit about this concept of transition on a global scale. If you follow my videos and my work, you'll know that I like to talk a lot about transition concepts. And one thing to be aware of is the way in which society is starting to transition, or not starting, but continuing a transition that's been going on for a very long time. There's different points in history where I could pinpoint this kind of long-term transition, but I'll just start with Arnold Ehret. If you go back to the late 1800s, you start to see consciousness of people in the direction of plant-based living, plant-based healing, and then Ehret becomes sort of a figure that really put it together in an important way. And naturopathy really comes out of Ehret. A lot of the standard, what became sort of standard methodology, the person that created the first naturopathic college, Benedict Lust, he was a student of Arnold Ehret and comes out of that tradition, and he published his own versions of Ehret's works for several years. But I guess, or for many years, but that's another story. But so we start to see a little increase in consciousness, but we still got a long way to go in terms of the pus and the mucus society. You got the 20s, people are going. It's just so stimulated. If you look at it's stuff I used to talk about with different people in Mucusless Diet community and Brother Aaron stuff, and you can look historically at things through the stomach, as we talk about the great stomach change in the 50s and 60s with the advent of fast food and this sort of overproduction of food and agriculture and things. But before then, you can look and analyze the different historical periods based on what people were eating, and you'll see that the 20s were fairly at least in the United States, can be characterized as really stimulated. People were just in that party type of world. Everybody's kind of stimulated. Then what happens? After you get stimulated, after you get high, you have to come down. And so in the 30s, you see people coming down, and they call it what? A depression, because it was economic, but it was also mental and spiritual depression that a large number of people were going through. There were some people that didn't necessarily experience too much of a change. If you were, say, African American or some different people around the world, your situation didn't necessarily even change economically or otherwise. But overall, you can see that period is characterized by, things are kind of, people got depressed. And you start to see the wars cropping up again, World War II, and there's that whole thing where when I see as I'm kind of a history buff in that sense, I've watched a lot of documentaries on all these historical periods and read books and all that kind of stuff, but I always take the mucusless filter. So when I watch the old footage of the fascists or the Nazis or different folks, Stalin and these guys, it's all I see is constipation, and I see organized constipation, where and constipation can be looked at as anything that's getting in the way of elimination, anything getting in the way of progress, that revolved around that whole kind of war period coming out of that depression in the 30s. It's just based on, again, kind of coming down from just being so high in the 20s. Now, and understand, I'm speaking metaphorically here. This is not a historically accurate sort of depiction or discussion. This is just some thoughts. Perhaps another way to look at, go watch a historical documentary, go watch a documentary on World War II or something, and do it with this concept of pus and mucus eating is at the foundation of all war, of all fighting. Take the pus and mucus out of the equation, and what does that look like? Is everybody all standing up here and and ready to go fight and kill people? Or is it going to be a different vibe? And that is the importance of being able to apply Mucusless filter to history, to society, culture. So, get through the end of World War II. You have, and that ends with a big explosion, which is, I would connect that with like a stroke. At that point, the world had a stroke, and just a blood vessel burst, and you just had a lot of dead blood, a lot of vital blood die. I like to connect the world and the happenings of the world to the human body. So for me, Earth is like tissue, and humans are blood corpuscles. And depending on how healthy you are, that you can either contribute to the earth and help it grow. If you're living a natural, mucus-free life, say just if you were in nature, eating nothing but fruit, or green leafy vegetables, but particularly fruit, then your bowel movement is necessary to germinate and create more agriculture, to create more, not agriculture, but just the natural environment. You don't have to give it a fancy word. That's just nature, the circle of life, as they call it, where you go from if you're a meat eater, you have to process your excretions are so toxic. I mean, you got to go through this whole process of cleaning it, all this kind of stuff. Or if you eat nothing but fruit, and you, because it's like look at the animals that are just plant-based eaters that are just walking around. They don't have toilets. They don't have to process their feces. We don't have all kinds of messed up atmosphere because there's some deer that are having a bowel movement by a tree. But when humans start to have bowel movements out in the open, people start going through crazy eliminations, and stuff is just very nasty. But if humans were eating nothing but fruit, you see a different situation. So that's my connection. So humans are blood corpuscles. Some of them are very sick corpuscles. The others are a little more vital. And Earth is like tissue. And sometime I'll do a thing where we can look at Google Earth, and I used to have this analyzation. If you go on Google Earth and you look at wherever there's large populations of people, it looks constipated, like on the Earth, like it looks like cancer. You see a lot of it's like a tumor, like each city is a tumor on the Earth, because humans were not really meant to live like that. We're not meant to live in these big skyscraper. I mean, that comes from a pus and mucus way of thinking. Makes them real hard, that it goes real straight up, and it's just like a big tumor. And when you look at the city, it's just all this cement. and it's concentration of constipated corpuscles that can't really move. It's like in the body, you get a clot. It's a bunch of stuff that's blocking the flow of blood. Then it's not a good thing. I think if we can have such a more rational way of living, that would entail being more spread out, because there's enough room to be more spread out on the earth. Everybody talk about, oh, there's too many people and stuff. Well, we can spread out, but we would have to again have a different value system, different eating habits, different living habits. So I won't get into that, but I know I kind of left off it talking about World War II. So we have our stroke depicted by our heart. We had a stroke and a heart attack. We had 2 atom bombs went off. So stroke and a heart attack, and then there's a recovery period, and and then it's right after that. It's almost like being in the hospital and they start giving you a bunch of pus-forming foods as you're laying there. That's kind of what the end of the 40s is like, laying in the not the emergency room, but being sort of bedridden for about 5 years, and they're starting to bring you all this nasty food, and physiologically, that physiology was able to get kind of hopped up. Like, oh, okay. So then once you get to the 50s, we say the great stomach change. You start to see the fast food, and all this kind of stuff, and gluttony is getting ready to be taken to a whole different level. And I am speaking largely, Western concepts, but the problem is that the activities of the West have affected numerous peoples outside of that sphere. From indigenous peoples and islanders and folks all around the world have got the experienced the negativity that has come from what folks in the Western world have done. Just the dynamics of economics, in the world right now. So let's go through the 60s. Interesting thing about the 60s is, on one hand, you have this, it's almost like a fight between cleanliness and constipation, because on one hand you have revolutionaries that are trying to uprise, trying to stand up for themselves, it's like there is this cleanliness and this sort of revolution that has been taking place, and Arnold Ehret was, I place Arnold Ehret as sort of a forefather of that. A lot of people don't understand. Read the article on the Gordon Kennedy article on the hippie history of hippies, and there's a whole plug-in. I had to do a long video on that sometime, because that's a whole hour-long talk to really even get into that. But you look at that, there's this thread of people that are trying to get themselves together mentally, physically, spiritually, and they are then at odds with the oppressor, which is the obstruction. See what I'm saying? So the obstruction, when I see all, we look at the police brutality videos, and this is like that government entity, that when they say the man, we should change it. Instead of calling it the man, let's call it the obstruction. So it's people trying to get themselves together against obstruction. And obstruction doesn't want to have nothing to do with getting things together. Like, no, let's suppress that, let's kill that, let's get it strung out on LSD, let's get it off of which now I'm getting into the hippie culture history, but let's discredit it. That's enough of that. Constipation has to run the show. And so you have this uprising, all this it came to a head in the 60s, getting into the 70s, and then by the 80s it chills out. The constipation seems like it won You really look now, and I'm looking at the civil rights movement and Black Power movements, and you have the anti-war movement. There was so much going on in the 60s and 70s on this side, trying to oppose this great constipation. But what it looks like and this is just my interpretation when I look back at history, and then it looked like the 80s. You see a lot of these hardcore revolutionaries and stuff. They didn't have the physiological piece together, so they weren't able to keep things moving. They weren't able to keep it going. So you see a lot of the most when I look at these documentaries, I look at these hardcore revolutionaries, and now you see them just looking Huxtable, just looking like some Bill Cosby folks, and they didn't look like that at all in the 60s and 70s. They looked like they was ready to tear this thing down, start over again. But then they ended up assimilating as they got older, and so I look at that like the constipation one. But people don't realize, see, it only takes one or a small group of really clean blood corpuscles in the body to start to remind the other blood, say, hey, remember, like it's like trying to remind you of your cleanliness. Like, hey, why don't you like function a little better? Like clean yourself up. So as more and more blood, in this case humans, people, start to get hip, so you start off with just a couple people, like in Cincinnati where you got your brother Air, and then you have other people around the world that I had a chance of starting to meet, of people that have been into Eric, but privately and quietly, and then really have people know what they're doing, but it just takes those couple people, and before you know it, there's more and more people, or more and more blood corpuscles are starting to clean themselves up, and as they clean themselves up, the earth gets cleaned up, and so although we had this huge period of 80s just constipation galore, I mean just and then that just fed right off into the 90s. But what started to happen 90s going into the early 2000s, now the vegan thing is starting to kind of come back again, like, and even though there's an economic reason, there is also a transitional element to that, and it took a long time from those early days in the early 1900s to get to where by the end of the 90s and going into the 2000s, veganism was becoming more acceptable, or in other words, just plant-based dieting.
Just excited to give it a whirl.
See, I love the title of your book, Veganist, Lose Weight, Get Healthy, Change the World.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were thinking that as a process, that they're thinking about the animals. Mm-hmm. They're also thinking about getting healthier. Everybody's pooping more.
I know.
Everybody's pooping more.
10 billion animals a year, and we've always been told that meat is a great source of protein. So going vegan is a radical idea for many people. So where do you get your protein? That's what everybody wants.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I first got into it.
And this is the transition that had to occur to get people ready for mucusless diet level. Because most people don't have an interest in going from neck bones into a mucusless consciousness, but there are more people that are open to the mucusless diet methodology if they become interested in plant-based living, and so this whole long discussion is basically just been sort of a transitional analysis of looking at how society has shifted and continues to shift in this direction. We have world leaders that are starting to become vegans to heal themselves, like the Bill Clinton. I don't know if he's still vegan. I don't care. He had all kinds of heart attacks and stuff, and became plant-based for a while, lost some weight, and felt better. And then people always want to say, well, he went back to eating this, or he had a little bit of that. I mean, the point is that it's a transitional thing to observe. When you have people like that in you know, these kind of real influential figures in the world that start to promote and talk about veganism, even if it's not of the purest intentions, even if these may be people that are trying to capitalize on an economic and social shift. The fact is that the shift is occurring, and that makes it easier for people that are become interested in the highest level, which in my opinion is Mucusless diet. And so it's just a bit of transitional thinking. Again, I'm trying to do more. I want to do more stuff on mindset, you know, mucusless mindset, and this is, you know, it's kind of the way that we see the world, the way that we think, and it is amazing as you'll start walking down the street or driving up the street, and things will just look so different. So I should have a disclaimer, which I do. I have disclaimers on all my stuff, but a specific disclaimer on, you know, your mind could be totally changed. You know, the way that you see the world, your viewpoint, be transformed, going down this path in ways that you did not expect. And that's what Tony's experiencing. That Israel, a lot of other folks are starting to see, like, wow, didn't realize it was going to be like that, in terms of, you know, transformation of consciousness. But it's very powerful. So, all right, again, I thank you so much for checking out this video. You know, hit the like button, subscribe, share this with folks that you think can handle such a discussion, kind of an abstract connecting of things. So yeah, until next time, peace, love, and breath.